Chapter 12 closed with a direct test. The governance story told to auditors should match the operational story told at the end of a difficult week. That test is easy to state and genuinely hard to pass, because passing it depends on something that no framework, no overlay, and no set of controls can supply on its own. It depends on the culture operating inside the system. Chapter 13 is where that argument becomes practical. Culture is not a background condition that either helps or hinders the real work. It is itself a capability, one that can be observed, diagnosed, and deliberately shaped through the same small, repeated actions that define every other operational discipline. That is what this chapter is about. Culture is something you do, not something you have. The diagram on this slide is a technical system map. Nodes, dependencies, connections, the full complexity of a modern digital operation. At the center, highlighted and radiating outward, is a single signal: human system operation. Everything else in the diagram depends on what that signal does. The caption underneath earns its place as the governing statement of the entire chapter. Having the right technical overlay means nothing if the wrong culture is operating inside it. DVMS provides the structure. The 7 capabilities provide the functions. But the human system at the center determines whether the structure produces real governance or an elaborate performance of it. This chapter is about making that center observable, testable, and improvable, treating culture not as a mood to be managed but as a capability to be built. 2 stories can emerge from the same incident, and only one of them gets filed. The paper story for a payment flow configuration drift looks clean. Root cause identified, fixes agreed upon, procedural adjustments made, status closed, result apparent success. Every check in place. The review ran on schedule and finished on time. The room story is different. A junior engineer attempted to raise a prior near miss, something they had noticed weeks earlier that bore directly on what just happened. They were interrupted. The conversation was redirected to stay on scope. The near miss was crossed out and went unrecorded. The feedback loop did not break because a technical control was missing. It broke because the room had learned, through accumulated experience, that surfacing uncomfortable information was not worth the cost. That is the cultural failure this chapter is designed to address. Not the absence of a process, but the presence of a lesson that the wrong process has been teaching, and the starting point for fixing it is being able to see the room story, not just the paper story. The reason culture has been so difficult to act on in organizational governance is that it has been measured in the wrong places by the wrong people, using the wrong instruments. Periodic engagement surveys, town halls, value statements, enterprise HR programs. These are the standard toolkit, and they share a common failure. They treat culture as vague, soft, and unquantifiable, located somewhere between the all-hands meeting and the performance review. The shift this slide proposes is complete. Culture gets measured in real time, not periodically, through what actually happens in meetings as they run, not through retrospective surveys of how people felt about them afterward. It lives at high-stakes system boundaries, not at town halls. Its nature is systemic, observable, and trackable. The same standard applied to every other operational signal. And its ownership belongs to the boundary manager, not to an enterprise HR program 2 organizational layers removed from where the work happens. You do not need a multi-year program to measure culture. It is available as operational evidence in every review, every deployment, and every debrief. The question is whether anyone is reading it. A governed capability whose decisions are never challenged is not governing. It is announcing. An assured capability whose findings are never acted upon is not assuring. It is collecting. Both of those failures have the same root. The cultural conduit between raw boundary evidence and the capabilities meant to act on it is blocked. The conduit this slide names is honesty without penalty, the minimum viable cultural condition for any governance capability to do its real work. When that conduit is open, evidence from the boundary flows upward, gets examined honestly, and produces decisions that change the system. When it is closed, evidence still gets collected, reviews still get run, findings still get documented, but nothing changes at the boundary, because the information that would force a change never quite arrives in the form that would compel action. Culture is not a nice-to-have layer on top of the operational capabilities. It is the condition that determines whether those capabilities do their real work or merely perform the appearance of it. Every boundary generates two kinds of signals simultaneously: technical telemetry, latency, error rates, tickets closed, and human telemetry that most organizations are not even looking for. Both matter equally to the health of the assurance loop. At the onboarding stage, the relevant human signal is risk communication. Are trade-offs being explicitly named, or does the team retreat into technical jargon to obscure a decision that someone is uncomfortable making? At execution, it is near-miss surfacing. Are manual overrides reported voluntarily as operational evidence, or hidden as failures because reporting them feels like admitting fault? At reconciliation, it is post-decision behavior. After an incident, does the team discuss what was actually learned, or rush to close the ticket and move on? These human patterns are as relevant to the health of the assurance loop as any technical variance. A boundary where latency is within spec but near misses are systematically hidden is not a healthy boundary. It is a boundary that looks healthy on the dashboard, while quietly accumulating the conditions for a larger failure. Technical drills test whether the architecture holds under stress. That is necessary and not sufficient. A failover that completes successfully when conditions are clear and everyone knows their role tells you relatively little about what happens when the signal is ambiguous, the incident commander is unavailable, and the first person to notice the problem is the most junior person in the room. A cultural drill tests something different: whether the habit of speaking up holds under the same pressure conditions. Rotating the incident commander builds the muscle memory of leadership that is distributed rather than concentrated. Introducing ambiguous system alerts creates the scenario where the correct move is not to act decisively, but to state uncertainty and ask for input, which is precisely the behavior most organizations accidentally train out of people through years of rewarding confident decisiveness over honest uncertainty. Debrief pauses interrupt the momentum of an incident to ask what the team is observing and what they are not saying. A culturally informed rehearsal deliberately inserts the conditions where speaking up is hard, because those are exactly the conditions that will exist when something real goes wrong. Testing only the architecture leaves the human system untested until it matters most. Blameless has been widely misunderstood as meaning consequence-free, and that misunderstanding has done real damage to the practice. A review where nothing changes is not blameless, it is just toothless. The distinction the chapter draws is more precise and more useful. Blameless means consequences attached to the system, not the individual. A good review is both fair and precise. It refuses to locate the cause in human error, not because humans are never involved, but because human error is always a symptom of a system that created conditions where that error was likely. The organization must name what it will do differently, not who it holds responsible. That is the rigorous side of blamelessness. Updated runbooks, changed deployment patterns, revised QoQM metrics. Real systemic consequences clearly owned, connected directly to what the evidence showed. The scale tips toward systemic consequences precisely because individual blame is the cheaper, easier, more immediately satisfying answer, and the one that changes nothing about the underlying condition. Culture is not built through culture programs. It is built in 100 small moments that never reach a presentation slide. And the most consequential of those moments is the question a manager asks immediately after an incident occurs. Two questions, two completely different futures. Who approved this routes the team toward self-protection. The team feels penalized, near misses get hidden, and over time the culture learns to protect itself rather than improve the system. What did the system miss routes the team toward learning? Systemic gaps get exposed, pattern changes get implemented, and the culture learns that surfacing problems leads to better outcomes rather than worse personal ones. Stated values on a wall do not build culture. A single shift in the questions asked during the next 3 incident reviews will produce observable evidence of cultural change within a single quarter. That is the compounding power of the micro-move. It costs nothing to ask a different question, and it changes everything about what the organization learns from what just happened. The most reliable way to change culture is not to launch a culture initiative. It is to run a small bounded experiment at a single boundary, measure what changes, and let the results make the case for broader adoption. 2 target behaviors are enough to start. Increase voluntary near-miss reporting, and establish the norm of naming concerns openly during change reviews. 2 meeting prompts embed those behaviors into existing rhythms without adding new calendar entries. At the weekly review, ask what we are worried about that is not in a ticket yet. At the post-change review, ask whether anyone noticed anything during the deployment window that the review should know about. 2 trackable indicators show whether anything actually shifted: the ratio of systemic pattern changes to simple ticket closures, and whether speaking time in meetings is becoming more distributed or staying concentrated in the same 2 or 3 voices. A 2-month experiment at a single boundary yields more operational change than a multi-year enterprise values campaign, because it is specific, measurable, and connected directly to work the team is already doing. When the QOQM loop is functioning and the cultural conduit is open, 3 artifacts circulate naturally. Near-miss reports surface before anyone asks for them. Post-incident reviews produce genuine learning rather than defensive timelines, and measurable pattern updates follow directly from what those reviews found. That cycle: near-miss report, post-incident review, measurable pattern update, is the visible signature of a healthy governance loop. The gamification trap sits directly adjacent to this success. The moment a near-miss count becomes an optimization target, the moment someone reports their near-miss numbers to leadership as a performance metric, teams will optimize the count rather than the reporting behavior. The number goes up. The honesty goes down. Artifacts tell you whether the loop is functioning. They are not the loop itself, and treating them as performance targets destroys the very signal they were generating. When culture functions as a capability, QOQM branches produce actual governance decisions rather than explanations assembled for auditors. The artifact is evidence of a decision already made, not documentation of a compliance posture being maintained. When the technical system and the cultural system are running as a single integrated loop rather than 2 parallel tracks, something fundamental shifts about how risk works inside the organization. Risk conversations stop being about managing external narratives and start being about fixing the actual system, because the team has reliable enough information about what is actually happening at the boundary that the conversation can be honest. The gap between the paper story and the operational story vanishes, not because someone worked hard to align the documentation, but because the evidence being documented is the evidence being used to operate. And evidence is generated naturally during daily operations rather than scrambled together when an audit arrives. Because the loop that produces operational learning and the loop that produces audit evidence have become the same loop. Systematic learning is no longer an abstract concept at that point. It becomes the natural extension of what the team already does on its best days, extended, made consistent, and made visible. That is the end state this chapter has been building toward. And it is reachable through the same small, repeated actions that every other operational discipline is built from.